Darn.
Or I can fill in the minutes prior to that, the
Okay.
business that was taken. You can just move on to the next agenda item.
Okay. Good call there, Finn.
Yep.
So motion passes unanimously, 4-0. Next up on the agenda is a review of Bartholomew and Company's responses to the comments that we provided to the investment
Which one
policy
you want to do
statement.
first, Jeff?
I'm sorry?
Which one you want to do first? I'll pull it up.
Yeah, why don't we go to, maybe we can go to the general fund first.
Okay.
So we reviewed these statements a few weeks ago. Comments were shared with Bartholomew and Company, the advisor to the town for its investments. They have provided back their commentary to our questions and comments. And I thought we could just go through those briefly. I think generally they answered our questions and comments as opposed to made any changes. So, Steve, maybe you can inform us at this point what our next steps here. Is this just turned over back to the select board for their consideration? Ultimately, they're the body that would need to propose any specific changes, as I understand it, to these policies.
Yeah,
We're,
so well,
we're in a
exactly.
advisory and commenting role
Yep.
here.
So well, yeah, so basically I just wanted to get it back in front of you guys one more time where some of their comments were, well, there was that they commented and didn't make any changes, but I also wanted to make sure that their comments didn't raise any additional concerns or questions. If you're generally satisfied, agree or disagree with their rationale and comments, at at that point, I would bring it before the Board of Selectmen and see if, based on your concerns and their answers, if they would like to change these documents.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I thought maybe we would just focus on those that had more substance than were form. I had pointed out in several places where they were using capitalized terms, but yeah, those weren't defined anywhere. And I think in pretty much every case, they thought that they could simply change those from being capitalized terms, which I would expect to be defined somewhere, to lowercase. So to me, the more substantive suggestion under the general fund policy is under restrictions. That would be page 2. And then maybe a general comment that we didn't point out before, Steve, would be probably useful if this policy statement had page numbers.
Okay.
The other one does. Yeah, this one seems to be lacking. So under restrictions, the question was raised first about whether the language in this section complies with Mass General Law, and they believe it does. More specifically, the question was raised, and this was my experience, and David, maybe you can share from your perspective, but I know the financial institution that I worked at had a code of conduct that extended beyond just me and to immediate family members, because they could directly benefit from a relationship that involved the awarding of contracts and the transference of money. That does not appear to be the standard in the state of Massachusetts. So they are not, don't seem to be in agreement, the advisor, that any change is needed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's consistent with what I've seen at the financial institutions I've been at, and that,
That it would extend to family members as well and others that can benefit directly from the relationship. Yeah.
yep,
So I don't know where, I'm sorry.
no, that's correct, Jeff.
Yeah. So I guess we can move on. It's up to the town, I suppose, but it's not supported by the consultant to broaden that policy or the restriction.
I guess are you suggesting that the change be made, or because I can just keep a running tally here?
I would suggest yes. I would ask for the committee's opinion, or our, then we'll make a make a recommendation as a unit.
I'd support that.
Yeah, I would support it as well.
Okay, so it seems to be fairly unanimous that that suggestion be brought to select board. Okay, moving forward, I'm now on page 6. That's where I last or next saw something of any substance. Excuse me. It's well, it's essentially the same issue. I'm looking at ethics. So the same question was raised. Does the current language comply with Mass General Law, and should this section be extended to immediate family members?
Trying to remember the conversation we had on this a month or two ago. It was something like, there are a lot more restraints on a municipal employee than just what's in this paragraph, and they've kind of picked ones that maybe are most relevant, but are not comprehensive. And so they've kind of tried to reinvent the wheel here. And so I was looking at your question. I'm not entirely sure that they picked up on that particular aspect of what you were trying to communicate to them. They said, we think, if I look at the first note, it says, we believe this complies with those requirements. And then, it's up to the town to establish policy, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, again, we're just reinventing the wheel.
Right. Yeah, they're not really taking a stand, right? They're not actually offering some guidance here, except to say that they think that this kind of standard language is compliant with Mass General Law. So I would think we're in the same place we were on page 2 in suggesting that the select board consider that personal activity and the holding of material financial interests in financial institutions that do business with the town extend not just to the treasurer, but to immediate family as well. Would you all agree? It's essentially the same. It's the same issue.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then further, I thought I suppose useful, or we thought useful for the disclosure. However, it's not really clear what action would be taken, or if it were simply prohibited if the finance director did have a material interest in a financial institution that is doing business with the town. So, don't know if that could be a little better communicated. So, what if disclosed? Then what?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing about having written, policy procedure and statements like this is that, particularly the contract employees in the personnel handbook, that, a fireable offense is, acting in conflict of, mass general law or town policies and things like that. So it kind of is this is kind of putting it out there that this is the rule, and then, you have to follow it.
That you would just have to disclose it, but then it's not clear how the disclosure is used. Again, from my experience, this sort of investment, were it something that I held when I joined the firm, I would need to divest it. I wouldn't be able to hold it. It'd be too much of a conflict of interest. Don't know if other members of the committee have a similar thought, but that was my experience. So if not, then maybe the question back to the select board is if there's been thought for, once disclosed, how is that information used? Does that seem fair to the rest of the committee?
Yes, thanks.
Yes. Yep.
Next up was page 7. It seemed important to us that in order to do the due diligence that's required on the financial institutions that would be holding funds from the bank, from the town, that the town subscribed to this service. But this section D suggested that maybe the town isn't purchasing this rating service, so it wouldn't have that independent information about the solvency and the stability of the financial institutions into which the town were making deposits. So that was questioned in section D, and the response was that most towns do, and it would be up to Wenham to decide if the budget allows for it. Do you know, Steve, if we are?
We do not purchase it, no.
So we rely on the banks that we're doing business with to share their ratings with us to
Yes,
complete this section or this due diligence.
yes.
Do you know, is that a decision that's been reviewed recently? You're not subscribing to this service?
No, I mean, this is the first time this conversation has come up since I've been here. I can say the last couple communities I've been with they did not subscribe either. I'm not sure how popular it is. I'm saying it's not a good idea. Just I'm not sure how common it is that communities subscribe to this service. We certainly we can look into it and get some cost and see if it's might be worth our while trying to get involved in that service.
Sure. Well, that may be the appropriate follow-up here. I don't think any of us know what this rating service is or what the cost is, but it is referenced in the policy a few times as a good resource for making that judgment. So I'm just not sure how we do it otherwise. Other than it does state in here somewhere that we would ask that financial institution to share their rating information. Doesn't seem like they have to, but we would ask. Okay, section E, reporting requirements. I think they agreed that the reporting, maybe I'm jumping ahead to the OPEB. Okay, I think we were just a little uncertain initially about in that opening paragraph where they're talking about 1 or 2 reports, and they clarify that it's a single report that is prepared by the investment advisor that's then shared with the treasurer. I think we questioned why it wouldn't be appropriate that it also be shared with the finance director. I would think that would be a requirement. And I think the response just states that every town is a little different. So I don't know if we want to have our policy changed to require that the treasurer share that with the finance director. I would think we would. I don't know if anybody disagrees with that.
No, I agree.
And then lastly, under the reporting requirements, yeah, again, I'm just drawing from my experience of having to attest periodically to my compliance with code of conduct, whether an affirmative statement from the treasurer as to their compliance with this investment policy statement should be required. And the response from the outside consultants is that it's part of their review to determine that the treasurer is in fact adhering to the policy statement. And so it would appear that they do not support the suggestion of taking that extra step of the treasurer needing to make an affirmative statement about compliance with the semi-annual reporting. Yeah, we raised the suggestion, doesn't seem supported by the consultant. I would open it up to the rest of the committee to see if that's something we should propose to select board or just move on that point.
I mean, in practice, would this be them just signing a form while they're submitting this report? Like, is there any, in terms of demonstrating it, is that the extent to which?
Yes, essentially it is. It's essentially a reminding. It's an affirmation. It's a affirmative statement that I understand the policy. I am in compliance with the policy. So I think to Steve's point that maybe that's covered in the handbooks somewhere in terms of the responsibilities of a town employee to be in compliance with these things, and this is an unnecessary additional step. I was simply referring back to my experience having to do that myself. Maybe it's belt and suspenders. Doesn't sound like there's strong support for pushing for this, so we can move along. I think that's it for general. If you would open up the OPEB, Steve.
Yep. Yep.
I'm starting. I don't know if anybody else has anything, but I was starting on page 4. Well, numbered page 4. Foreign currency risk. And the comment here just referenced that by policy, the town is supposed to, as much as feasible, mitigate foreign currency risk. Open to the question of, well, how is that being done?
Yeah, that seems, Jeff, highly atypical for a conservatively managed fund. I mean, I understand if you're trying to build a diversified portfolio for an individual and you want to have, exposure to non-domestic markets. If we're going to exclude things like BDCs, I understand the crypto, but if we're going to exclude things like BDCs, and I don't know why you'd want portfolio managers trading currencies. It feels a little out of step with what I would expect sort of a typical town fund.
Yeah, agreed. And
maybe they do it just to cover themselves and get as wide.
Sounds that way, yes, doesn't it?
It's probably just a wide aperture. Like, don't ever get caught. If someone does buy something and they feel like they want to buy something in Canada and want to hedge the exposure, that they don't get themselves sort of, in a position where they're out of step with the fund guidance. But it just seems like a strain. It sort of threw me as strange.
Right. Yes, and I think the question was along those lines. Why mitigate? Why not just avoid, as opposed to trying to think about how to mitigate that sort of risk? They said they haven't seen it in a very long time. It's up to the town. If the town wishes for there to be no foreign exchange exposure, that of course can be added. So I think as a committee, we should decide, is that a suggestion? Are we happy to just leave it as is? The advisor is suggesting that it is very unusual. Haven't seen it in quite a while, but to Dave's point, they're just trying to keep this as broad as possible. for the
I
future investment funds.
I would probably seek to remove it personally. Just if we don't want to take currency risk in the fund, why would we want to have it in there? I mean, that's a little bit, because if say something does happen down the road, they're covered and we're not, right? It really goes back to the investment philosophy of the fund. If it's principal retention and conservative growth, I'm not sure I'd take currency risk, and we're going into a period of higher volatility, not lower.
Yes, but they still didn't explain the statement or explain how they would mitigate foreign currency risk.
And do you really want them trading currencies with the general fund to have that kind of latitude?
Yeah.
Might be a question
This is
for Steve as
this
well.
is the OPEB fund, which is longer term, the other post-employment benefits, but point taken. Yeah, it's still pretty speculative. And is this the right firm to be advising on foreign currency risk and which currencies to be in and out of to make money and not lose our principal?
I mean, I only have the perspective of, I have a one town perspective. So I don't know, Steve, if you've seen that from your prior experience, administrating other towns, if they've had, broader latitude on their investments.
Yeah, I will say that the last two towns I was in generally did not get in the weeds too much with these.
Sure.
And rightly or wrongly, I don't think it's wrong to remove the currency risk, but they kind of took this as the financial the advisor is giving us this, recommending we implement it, and basically that's what they do.
Yeah.
Well, I would agree with Dave. I think this is more for the benefit of our advisor than for the town. I would be inclined to suggest that we, as a town, look elsewhere for investment opportunities and not try to trade in foreign currencies, but would leave it to the other members of the committee to weigh in, see if there's a plurality here or if we move on.
I don't have a strong opinion here. I mean, the one thing I would add is I wasn't clear from reading this, and maybe it's somewhere else, if in conjunction with this, they're also covering exchange rate risks from companies that may be operating internationally, which, there could be many large, okay investments for that. But I also don't think we need to go down that rabbit hole. So I'm fine with this suggestion.
Finn, what do you think?
I'm fine. I think we can.
Okay. So why don't we propose that, Steve, as well, to the select board that that they consider simply eliminating.
Can you see my comment? I don't know what you guys can see.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah,
I wasn't sure if they were showing up or just the document.
Yeah, you're right.
Sometimes it's
there.
It's also incumbent upon the asset manager to come back and say, no, we have strategies in these places, so we need this and why. You know what I mean? So I would expect them to come back if it puts a strategy already at risk.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, in their comments, they say we have not seen this in a very long time in any of our portfolios.
Right.
So yeah, so let's just shut the door on it.
Exactly. Yep.
Next up, ethics. Very similar, actually identical to what we were discussing under the general fund. And the suggestion that it extend to immediate family members. And then again, the question about if disclosed, how is that information used? Should it be disclosed or simply divested? Under the relationship with financial institutions, now here it reads, if a banking institution is selected as a manager, then the town will subscribe to that Veribank rating service we were discussing in the other policy. So I think it's still of interest to know if it has been considered and if it were a decision of the town not to, is it worth revisiting?
Sorry, Jeff, what page you on? I seem to.
Still on page 4, section G. Yeah, we see reference again to that rating service, and here it describes when the town will subscribe to it. I think the question back to the select board again is it a rating service that has been considered recently, and what's the cost, and would it be prudent to have it? Okay, next up under reporting requirements, we raised the question of what is the minimum information that should be reported to the town on a semi-annual basis regarding the investments. We felt that there were a number of data points that we thought any investor would be interested in seeing at a minimum in a semi-annual report of how their portfolio is performing, which was not listed in the minimum requirements. And the response from the advisor is that yes, in fact, some of these other data points that we've pointed out are indeed part of the standard and normal information that would be provided. I would ask the question then, why is it not described in the minimum requirements? If it's something that you do and is considered a standard practice, they didn't seem to answer that question. I don't know if that's something that the select board would like to have clarified or not, but it just seemed to us that there was a lot of other information that we should know, or the town should know, about the performance of the portfolio beyond what's listed here. Have you seen one of these statements, Steve? Can you describe just how expansive it is?
I've not seen one from Bartholomew. This will be my first year with them.
Okay.
Usually that benchmarking information, Jeff, is pretty easy to come by, as you know. It's pretty commoditized, whether you're pegging to the S&P 500 or some, subset, mid cap or whatever. It should be something you want to be able to see that the asset manager is either in line with an active strategy or a passive strategy or whatever it is. So you kind of have a feel, yeah, we're kind of in line with market performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we told them. And yeah, it sounds like they're saying it's in there. It's just not described as something that's required based on the investment policy. So yeah, it would be interesting to see actually one of their reports. But I just, yeah, I think we just don't know why they didn't offer those data points as being part of the minimum requirement. But you're right, yeah, that's how you assess their performance, right?
Yep.
And then last up are the comments we made in the addendum regarding the investment parameters. I know we had a lot of discussion around it and around the alternative category. You can see their responses here. They would define balanced if we really wanted them to, because the target is 0, even though the maximum is 10. They felt it really wasn't something that was necessary, but could be if we really wanted them to add a definition of what balanced is. Even if it could hold up to as little as 10% of all of our assets in this fund. Personally, I'd like to see them define it for us. You know, they've defined equity, fixed income, and alternatives, but not balanced. I don't know if that's relevant to the rest of the group. Then as far as the percentages under alternatives and the possibility that it would generally be at 20% and upwards of 30% and include up to 10% in real estate, our questions elicited explanation, essentially in defense of their recommendations, but they do say they are simply guidelines. And if we have a difference of opinion on what the targets should be, then we can certainly share them with them. We're not investment advisors, so that might be outside our area of expertise. We raised the question. We thought that some of these percentages were high. To Dave's point earlier, I think they are just looking for as much latitude as the town is willing to offer for them to be able to react to markets and shift where the funds are to try to, over the long term, result in the greatest gain possible for the town. And then you can see the response. The question came up about why would we, as a town reliant on real estate taxes, also want to invest in real estate. And they reminded us of the very long-term investment horizon that should not be too concerning with respect to investment in minimally liquid or illiquid investments, because it's a very long-term investment.
I think the other thing with the inclusion of like these alternative investments is is it their ability to, have an assumed rate of return over time a little bit higher. So then it reduces our unfunded liability. With uses, if you're discounting out, 30 years or whatever, then the larger the rate of return, the less unfunded liability is showing. So I think that's part of it as well.
Yeah,
the actuarial tables give us credit for those types of investment in reducing what our unfunded liability amount is. Is that essentially what it is, Steve?
Yeah.
And to be fair, most, whether it's the Harvard Management Company or any asset management companies out there, private credit is a pretty big part. Private equity and private credit is an increasing part of, and has been for the last, 30 years of generating, some sort of alpha above just a S&P 500 index. So that doesn't necessarily disturb me, but it's more a question of what's their model portfolio. So if they have $1 million, how do they cut that up? And what does that look like, right? These are target percentages, but sort of what is that? They'll move their allocations, I'm sure, a little bit to take advantage of relative value in the market. But what is, what is the sort of outer markers?
That would be interesting to know, where are we today?
Right.
In relation to the minimum target and maximum. Where does it sit? How often is it adjusted?
And I would think that's something the select board and others would want to see at least twice a year. Like what, and maybe that's all on the reporting statements. I'm not familiar with them, but not just the performance, but by asset class. So relative to this grid, if this is the grid they're living by, you'd want to see it, a couple times a year in markets like this. So just so you understand, you get your eyes on it, and you make sure they, it's another way to evaluate how they're seeing value in the market.
Mm-hmm. Presumably because they do, as stated earlier, report semi-annually and review the treasurer's management of the portfolio is in compliance with the investment policy statement. But that, why not? And I agree. Let's have them be more direct in describing exactly against these investment parameters. Where is the portfolio at certain times a year?
I mean, the narrative I'd want to see is, okay, here's the performance. Obviously, here's gains and losses and total portfolio value, like any statement we all get at the end of the quarter. But I'd also like to see some sort of narrative from the portfolio manager. This is what, our target asset allocation strategy is relative to what we're seeing in the market. It's the same thing your own financial advisor would give you in a separate account. They would say, here's what we did, and this is why. Not every move, just a couple paragraphs or a paragraph that just says, this is why we're, allocated here, just so you can understand what the psychology of their strategy is.
Is that a request you could take back to the select board, Steve? The finance committee would appreciate having the opportunity to actually receive and review an example of this semi-annual investment report that's produced by our investment advisor.
Sure.
I mean, it could be really simple for the asset manager. Can you give us a chart against our target? And could you tell us what your investment philosophy's been for either the last 6 months or what you see in the future? And any sort of asset manager worth their salt would be able to do that in about, very quick period of time if they're on top of the portfolio. it's not a big ask of Bartholomew, you know. But also it distills it down for the select board and for you, Steve, so that you can look at something quickly in 5 minutes and go, yep, it looks the way it should, or I feel good about this overall.
Okay. I'd like to kind of see what they're proposing as a report, and you guys can provide feedback.
Yeah, why
Yeah.
don't we start with that? If
That's a
you
good
haven't
idea.
seen it, we haven't seen it. Yeah, we can get a look at it and see if it's expansive enough, or to Dave's point, if there's some simple comparative analyses that they can offer us, would kind of describe where we're at in relation to the policy statement, and then also what has been their philosophy or their how have they been managing the portfolio over the last X period of months, and how has the market been guiding them in their decisions. So otherwise, I think we challenged them on the targets. They've offered their responses. Yeah, I don't personally think we're in a position to recommend any specific changes. I'd open it up to the group, though, to see if they thought otherwise. But I would propose that we move forward, and this is something which maybe we should have reiterated at the beginning. While it has been fairly static and not looked at periodically in the past, the plan is for this to be reviewed annually. Is that correct,
Yes.
Steve?
Yep.
Yeah. So Finance Committee will get a look, should presumably we get a look at this every year, and based on what we learn, maybe it would make sense to ask them to look a little bit harder about their investment parameters. So I would propose we leave as is. And thank them for their comments. That's what I wanted to point out in the policy statements. Open it up to the group if there's anything additional that any of the other members wanted to add. Hearing none. Next up on the agenda are liaison reports. We would move through these, see if there's anything for those that have been able to meet with the departments or committees that you are working with as their liaison, to share for the benefit of the group here what you are hearing, what you have learned, or if there are meetings that are scheduled but just haven't taken place yet. So we all kind of get up to speed a little bit. Looking at the list that I put together of the liaison assignments, Dave, I'd throw it out to you first. If
Sure.
anything that you'd like to share for the good of the group.
Sure, no problem. I first met with Rich Souza a couple weeks ago at the DPW. We had a good meeting. I've really used it as an opportunity to review the sort of prior submissions of the budget for myself, and then go in and just sort of understand what their needs, how they're feeling about the upcoming budget period, if there's anything specific that they have in terms of concerns going to the budget process. I won't speak, broadly for Rich, but I think he feels that his department's in relatively good shape. Some of the things that have benefited him is some of the state-funded contracts on roads that have put the roads in good shape. So the DOT contract on 97, similar to what's going on in other towns, has helped on the sort of road ratings and those things that they track to determine how the roads of Wenham are relative to certain benchmarks. So he feels, generally he doesn't have a ton of heartburn right now going into the budget period, but I'm going to be meeting with one of his counterparts that sort of comes in, Mike Hardy, who covers facilities for the town. So there's sort of an intersection there. And of course, as a new FinCom member, I'm learning how the sort of waterfall of different things sort of intersect. He'll be the last person I met with. I sat with Kim Butler at the library last week. They've had a lot of challenges with short-term staffing. A lot of the temp people that work the stacks and do those things, as you'd expect, there's a lot of turnover in that hourly folks there. I think longer term, obviously, we all understand that it's a level funding year and there's different sort of needs and challenges. I think they'd love to be able to have more of a succession plan there, so that there's someone, maybe there's in the future, a permanent role that someone can graduate, so that there's a succession plan from doing some of the hourly work and working into a low level position at the bottom. And I think that might help longer term with the constant rotation at the bottom of their organization. So that's sort of something she's focused on, but she's obviously been at it a while and knows all her line items of the budget. I probably don't have the lightning rod areas. I have some of the maybe the easier sort of more functional ones. And then I met with Jim Reynolds over at the Council on Aging, and sort of got an update on their budget and their process and what they're running through. And I think they're starting to see more and more activity in the center coming out of COVID, more and more people sort of showing up for the different things that they fund and the events that they fund. And he's been in place for a decade, so he really knows the organization well and is able to sort of navigate it period to period. So we went through, I actually met with him today. So really on the sort of last person I have to meet with is Mike Hardy on the facility side. So I'm really using it as an opportunity to sort of see what kind of needs they have, how they're feeling about. They've all sort of are in process of submitting their initial numbers or have submitted their initial numbers. But in the folks that I've met so far, I'm sure everybody would love that extra 25 to 50,000 to do some different additive things long term. But I didn't run into anyone that's got their sort of hands over their head and really, extremely stressed at this point about the budget process. But I think they do appreciate having the liaison process. I think it's something that existed before and then went away for a while, and I think there's generally appreciate having it back. That's it for my side.
Thank you for that, and good to hear that no identified heartburn or surprise at this stage in the process.
Yeah, not to say there aren't
Appreciate you
needs
getting out there. Well,
yeah,
of course,
yeah.
right.
Or they wouldn't want to do some additional things, but I didn't.
Of course,
everybody was sort of understood the need to level fund and the challenges and those things. So it was good for me to understand a little bit better how these departments function and the services they offer in town.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Scott, would you like to offer a review of the meeting that we had a week and a half or so ago, the quintuple chair, or I could, since I was there with the
I can start there. I think at a high level so in addition to the full select board meeting, the meetings we have with the select board and the schools and the planning committee and all that, which are where a lot of the budget gets discussed for the schools, there are these chairs meetings that Jeff and I attended, and Steve was there as well, along with the counterparts from Hamilton. And this one was more of a scene setting. These schools are just in the beginning stages of their budget process. And the meeting was more to connect with the towns to understand how the towns are approaching their budgets, get a sense of honestly the likelihood of if they're going to be overrides and what the schools can do to potentially prevent that. I think overall, a big focus of the schools, which this is was true last year as well, is trying to ensure that there isn't a huge increase in the school's budget for right now, knowing that there are these big projects coming in the future, notably the Fields project and the potential new elementary school. And so that message was reiterated. One thing that I think Jeff and I both learned that was interesting is that there apparently is a schools building committee that meets at the end of every month, and the finance committee from Wenham is able to attend that, but did not have a representative. And so now I am the representative to that committee, so I'll be attending that once a month. Although I did find out today that this month's meeting is moved back 2 weeks to mid-November. So that'll be another touch point where not directly budget related right now, because a lot of this is for the future, but will give us a better understanding of some of the long-term funding constraints or funding requirements in association with that school's project.
Great, thank you. And I think what I would add to that is the superintendent did mention that they are beginning a round of contract negotiations, which of course will put pressure on the salary line item for the schools. It sounded like pretty much every union representing employees at the school, in addition to a group of employees which I think are trying to organize, it will all be under consideration in the next 12 months or so. So, they have that ahead of them. And the other takeaway that I had was that this will be the last year. And Steve, maybe you have something a little more specific on this, but while the schools at the moment targeting are going to try to come in under a 3% increase, that is possible due to the use of E&D funds. So the excess and deficiency funds, which result from, or the current balance resulted from positions which were budgeted for, but not able to be filled through the worst of COVID. And those positions now have either been filled or they are not being budgeted for any longer. So the fact that those positions are not, the fact that those positions are going unfilled will not be generating a positive balance in this excess and deficiencies fund, which the schools will be drawing on for this coming fiscal year for the last time. So, I think through this process, one of the things I'd like to learn more is just to what extent are they drawing on that, so that we can see, what would have been their requested increase had it not been for the use of those funds, which cannot be repeated beyond the coming fiscal year. Did I describe that fairly well?
Yeah, very well. And Eric did mention in the meeting that, there are some other contributors to the E&D that they're taking a closer look at. So to try to make some further reductions beyond those funded staff positions that were unable to be filled. And, I think that I believe the contribution last year was almost $1 million out of the E&D to offset the assessments. Wenham was, benefit from that and the assessment shift where, our both enrollments are decreasing, if I remember right. However, ours is decreasing more than Hamilton. So the burden of the total cost is shifting more towards Hamilton. So between the two, we saw, you know, it was like 2 or 3 tenths of a % increase year over year coming into FY24. From what he said, that will not be the case this year, although they are targeting to get below 3% this year, which, based on what they said, just to roll their contractually obligated costs over, they're at 4.5%. So, so right there, they're using the E&D to reduce the assessment by about 1.5%, which would have been cost that would have been shared by the communities.
And then just a date in the future that I made note of, January 4th is what the superintendent described as the date we would have our first look at what the proposed school budget increase is. So a lot of work to be done by them as they collect their departments are rolling up budgets and then work to their own pushback on those before we get our look at what's going to be coming from the schools. Thank you, Scott. Finn, have you had an opportunity? Oh, you have actually, because we chatted a little bit. Opportunity to meet with.
Sure. So I met with the fire chief and the police chief in back-to-back meetings in 2 days. My sense from speaking to the police chief that he was pretty happy with the way the budget process went. He didn't have a lot of complaints. He was very familiar with it, very comfortable with it, and was expecting to kind of sail through fairly easily without a lot of conflict this year. And he mentioned some grants that were coming up through what is it, the transportation investment, the big national transportation law that was passed under Biden a couple months ago should have some funds available for Wenham, and so he thought that would be a good opportunity for us to take advantage of that and get some capital projects done. On the fire side of the liaison, it was another great conversation, kind of learning a lot. I got the sense that they felt they were a little bit more close to the ragged line of being funded enough to provide kind of level of services that the citizens of Wenham should expect. They're talking about how long would it take an ambulance to get here, to anybody in an accident, or how often they have to call for ambulances from other towns, which take a lot longer, that sort of thing. Which makes me wonder, again, first year here, neither the fire rescue nor the police departments are new institutions, right? So, understanding exactly what you might call, minimum services, acceptable services, or great services, like the definition, should be well established through some process, right? And like I said, I don't want to reinvent the wheel here, but if they were talking about, you should expect to get an ambulance to your house within 8 minutes of the call. Those sorts of metrics make sense to me as something that I would easily be able to explain to a citizen of Wenham if they're asking me, what do we need to have in the town? Well, the national standard is XYZ, and we meet it or we don't, right? It's a little easier to explain than sort of, with statistics than sort of ad hoc or kind of quantitative or qualitative sort of points. So I guess I need to get up to speed a little bit more on that. I spoke to them both of those chiefs saying, how do I understand this? How do you decide that it is or it is not good enough? It's got to be numbers based rather than feelings based. So how do I help there? But haven't spoken to them. Probably I've spoken to them via email, but I haven't really met with them again in the last 2 weeks. They're kind of waiting for the budget process to move a little further forward. But kind of that's my take on it.
Is that something they felt was available and they could share with yourself and the committee to kind of help us make that judgment about whether we are adequately staffed, understaffed, overstaffed, under-equipped, over-equipped in relation to
I'm not sure that it didn't sound like
independent
something that they had to hand, right? Or had thought about in that particular way before. And I hesitate to kind of try to enforce an idea that's new from a new committee member. But it seems like something I'd want to do. So, for instance, this idea that they are starting, they have the police have staff turnover, right? And when we have staff turnover that's unexpected, we have to bring in the reserve officers or have these guys go on time and a half, overtime rates, right? And there's going to be a rate, right? It's more expensive typically, right? To do that, bringing somebody on overtime, and you sit there and go, okay, well, we bring them in and have them work overtime because we need them. And why do we need them? Is it because we need to have exactly how many people driving around in cars and exactly how many people, sitting at, in the station at any moment, right? And how, what is that rule, right? And it's a little easier to kind of say, all right, to justify exactly how many full-time staff you need to have if you have an explicit sort of, expectation. We have this many police officers on, on working at any particular moment, and this many firefighters ready to go at any moment, full-time or part-time or in reserve or ready for on-call. And it's like I said, these sorts of departments are hundreds of years old, so there must be sort of a reasonable expectation after so many years of running to say what we should expect as citizens. So.
Thank you. Yeah, be interesting to see what sort of follow-up you receive. Mm-hmm. And yeah, since you mentioned that, I probably should have mentioned during the discussion with the school committee, with the superintendent as well, was the request both from Wenham and Hamilton to provide similar sort of information about the school system's performance against some recognizable benchmark. And it's something that was asked for last year. I understand it's kind of a challenge to put together, but it was reiterated this year that would be helpful in allowing us to think about whether the funds were being used effectively and efficiently. So I think they were going to take that as a to-do and try to provide that sort of information in a form that would be digestible for us and for the taxpayers in the town as they think about the school budget. So hopefully that is something that's in our future as well. Good update. Sounds like we're making some good progress there with the liaison visits, meetings. Thank you. I do not have anything else to add. And looking at our agenda, open discussion if there's anything on the minds of the committee members, I'll just kick it off by saying that I learned recently that our new finance manager that was thought to be starting part-time, well, by now, I think,
Yeah,
was the
this week.
estimate. It was going to be this week. Yeah,
16.
unfortunately, that's been pushed off for several weeks. Now I think the target, Steve, is late November.
Yeah, mid to late November.
Okay, so just wanted to offer that as an update to the rest of the group. The
His existing contract with the community he's at now has a 90-day clause that he has to give a 90-day notice. They were working with us because they thought they had a part-time retired finance director from another community who was going to come in part-time, and they were going to kind of split the role through the 90 days. But the retired individual, something came up and he's unable to start when he thought he was going to start, so it kind of pushed the whole plan back about 4 weeks or so.
I think that affects Steve more than it does us, but thought I'd just share that with the rest of the group.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's it is what it is. Jeff's a good guy, but Jeff Sula, we got a couple Jeffs, but Jeff, he's a good guy and excited for him to get started. I think everyone's gonna like him.
I had the opportunity to meet him when he was meeting with the select board just before he accepted the position. So, yeah, a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience. Excited about getting on board and helping the town of Wenham. So, yeah, looking forward to having him with us. Well, with that, I think we are at the end of the meeting. Absent any other comments from the committee, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye, Jeff.
Hi, David.
I've Finn.
All right, Scott.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Steve. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Yep.